Thank you. Thank you so very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Well, they're still here. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ziad, for the very warm, kind introduction. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to be with these wonderful people. Give me an opportunity to actually reacquaint myself with a lot of my friends, many of whom I have not seen for quite a number of years, actually some for decades. Grateful to be here. Also grateful because it gives me an opportunity to thank you and the American Task Force on Palestine for the great work you've been doing on behalf of the cause of peace and justice in the Middle East. It also is an opportunity for me today to congratulate the award winners on their brilliance. We're all proud of you. I'm your last speaker, I guess, tonight, and I'm sure many of you will say, oh, good news. The bad news is nobody told me anything about 2 minutes. So please bear with me. Thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, good evening. It is truly an honor for me to have the opportunity to address such an esteemed audience tonight. Tonight's event is neatly bookended by a number of significant events in the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Last month, we marked 15 years since the signing of the first in a series of interim agreements. Next month, of course, will mark 1 year since the renewal of peace negotiations at Annapolis. And yet, regrettably, we continue to walk the bumpy road to peace that began in Madrid 17 years ago this month. A lot can be said and has been said about the ups and downs of this process. But what we do know is that we all hoped we would be closer to peace by now. The Annapolis Conference embodied the hope that we would achieve a comprehensive peace agreement by year's end. In the meantime, we Palestinians had expected an improved economic and security environment to underpin the political track. Alas, few expectations have been met. Settlements pepper the West Bank and continue to grow. Every indicator of settlement activity, from public and private initiated construction to tenders and building permits, shows that rather than stopping, settlement activity has in fact accelerated since Annapolis. That's right, accelerated. Similarly, restrictions on access and movement are tighter than they were before Annapolis. Compare 563 checkpoints and roadblocks before Annapolis to 630 today, not to mention the severe tightening of the siege on Gaza. And land confiscations, home demolitions, military incursions and raids all continued. Needless to say, the quality of life for the average Palestinian has worsened. And if we are honest with ourselves, vague pronouncements that the current peace talks are ongoing and serious mean little on the Palestinian street, and when all is told, are of little relevance to people who are living hand to mouth. Ladies and gentlemen, as devastating as these developments have been on Palestinians' fabric of life, the combination of deteriorating conditions on the ground and the lack of political horizon have had an even worse impact on the Palestinian state of mind, which had already been seriously deformed by the erosion in self-esteem and self-assuredness prompted by decades of Israeli occupation or oppression. We Palestinians have felt this erosion. Those old enough to remember the first Intifada felt it during the second Intifada. We felt the shame of it in June of last year. We felt it last month when 12 of our citizens, including a baby, were killed in Gaza. I've always felt that an understanding of how this sad state of affairs came about was necessary to enable us to position ourselves on a path that could lead to freedom and independence. The truth is, the loss of self-esteem and assuredness had tended to elicit one of two seemingly diametrically opposed reactions amongst the Palestinian people, namely defeatism and belligerence. The painful truth is, neither is constructive. You cannot end the occupation if you are dominated by a can-do-nothing, defeatist kind of attitude. Nor will belligerence get you there, with what may come with it by way of violence and isolationist tendencies. When viewed this way, it becomes clear that the greatest obstacle that has prevented us Palestinians from achieving our national goals was not occupation per se or factionalism, not poverty or separation, but that deadly erosion of self-esteem and consequent loss of faith in our capacity to get things done. If this analysis is correct, and I believe it is, it follows that to end the occupation, we Palestinians must first rid ourselves of what 4 decades of Israeli occupation have precipitated by way of fear, skepticism, cynicism, self-doubt, and yes, loss of self-esteem. I believe we can, though I must confess, I did not always. At one point, the erosion of our self-esteem seemed to have taken on a life of its own, propelled by its own momentum, becoming almost self-fulfilling. Almost. However, I truly believe we can regain our sense of self-assuredness once we Palestinians collectively embrace, consciously embrace, a paradigm that says that along the way to freedom, defeatism must be defeated and belligerence must be set aside. To me, this is not only emancipation, it's deliverance. Acting on this conviction, and from day one, a day of national tragedy of virtually unprecedented proportions, my government set out to put in place and set in motion mechanisms capable of getting us there. My motto was, building towards statehood despite the occupation. This involved, in the first instance, building strong, effective institutions capable of delivering services to our people in an effective, expeditious, and fair manner, all within the framework of good governance. The effort has already started to bear fruit. In the area of financial management, for example, I'm proud to say that we now have a system that truly measures up to the highest international standards and practices. In addition to building up our credibility at home, this has won our government the international confidence necessary to secure much-needed aid, including from the United States and the European Union. Indeed, last March, the U.S. administration transferred $150 million directly to the Palestinian Authority coffers. This transfer was the largest sum of assistance to be transferred to the Palestinian Authority in a single tranche by any donor for any purpose since the authority's inception. What is more, the administration is about to transfer another $150 million to us the same way. Surely, this will be another strong message of support and desire to help, which I deeply cherish. What I cherish even more is a strong message of confidence in the integrity of our public finance system, which this action by the administration implies. For as you know, however strong the desire to help is, and indeed it is, Congress would not authorize a transfer directly into our coffers of this amount, or indeed any amount, were it not for the integrity and credibility which our financial system and management have come to enjoy. Thank you. This is but one example of the progress we have been able to achieve over the past year in building towards statehood. There are other important examples, especially in the sphere of security and law and order. Together, these efforts prompted United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to to speak of an emerging sense of self-empowerment on the part of the Palestinians. I share his assessment. I've had the opportunity to visit most districts in the West Bank this past year, which I hope to be able to replicate in Gaza. And everywhere I have been, I was greeted by a cautious yet distinct glimmer of the self-respect, pride, and resilience that makes me, despite all the obstacles we face, so very proud to be Palestinian. It is there in the streets of Nablus and Jenin, where law and order and thus a modicum of normalcy have been restored. It was there in Manger Square in Bethlehem, one starry night last May, when 1,000 businessmen, women, and dignitaries from all over Palestine and abroad, including Israel, dined together in the open air. It is there every Friday, and has been for the past few years, and will continue to be there, in Belain, where villagers peacefully protest against the erection of a despicable wall that threatens their livelihood and sometimes their life, though never their spirit. It was there one sad day when Palestinians walked up Ramallah Hill to bury Palestine's most highly revered literary icon, Mahmoud Darwish, conjuring up memories of the day our nation mourned the loss of our late President Yasser Arafat. It was there the day when a shipment of Palestinian pharmaceutical products, destined for the first time ever to Germany, made its way through the maze of economic restrictions in the West Bank to meet the most exacting pharmaceutical standards in the world. And yes, it was there the day Palestinians welcomed a boatload of visitors off the shore of Gaza. And it is there every single day that a Palestinian child goes to school, that a Palestinian farmer manages to work his or her land, that a Palestinian mother remains hopeful that her son will be released from Israeli jail, that a rural community begins to benefit from the implementation of one of literally hundreds of community development projects being implemented throughout the country, that a Palestinian family chooses, finds a way to remain on their land for another day. Ladies and gentlemen, we are approaching a critical mass of positive change, positive facts on the ground, as I like to call them, that are indicative of a most encouraging shift in the mindset of our people, away from doom and gloom, toward a distinct sense of possibility and the promise of a better future. When and where possible, with President Abbas's guidance and support, our government tried to help generate opportunities and create conditions to make these things possible, and in so doing, to nurture our people's sense of dignity in themselves. This, more than anything else, is what I think our job is all about. As we say here tonight, the courage to persist, the will to build. And I am unequivocally committed to continuing to do that, now and even after I leave office. Still, there's no dignity in what is happening to us now. And the same is true for the Israelis. There's nothing dignified in Israeli parents having to be afraid while their children are away at school. There's no dignity for the mother of the Israeli soldier who delayed a Palestinian woman at a checkpoint near Nablus, causing her to lose her unborn child. There's also nothing dignified about the world's fifth largest army subjugating a people with no country and no army. There's nothing dignified in a country that prides itself on being a democracy when it allows itself to be held hostage by a group of extremist settlers who forcibly put their own interests ahead of the will of the majority. Despite this, indeed because of this, we Palestinians remain hopeful. We remain resolute to reach a peaceful resolution to the conflict between us and the Israelis based on a two-state model. Palestinians long to live in freedom like any other people, for in freedom there is dignity, as there is in freedom from fear. In fact, we don't just seek peace. We seek a meaningful and lasting peace with Israel. We seek strong ties with Israel. We seek strong economic ties between the independent states of Israel and Palestine. We seek warm relations with Israelis. We do not want to simply get to a point where we just accept each other. We want to have warm relations where we both recognize the mutual economic, intellectual, spiritual, and of course security benefits of living and working together. We do not want to erect walls. We want to build bridges. We do not want to close Israelis out of our lives. We want to live with Israelis as our neighbors. However, let it be known that Palestinians are not interested in just any state and not at any cost. It is not just Israel who has a constituency it has to worry about and serve. Let's not forget the reason or the reasons why the results of Palestinian parliamentary elections were what they were in 2006. As one prominent Israeli advocate of peace put it, and I quote, "There is no Palestinian partner for improving the quality of occupation. There is only a Palestinian partner for ending the occupation," end of quote. When all is said and done, the Palestinian leadership will have to take any agreement it negotiates with Israel to its people. And people, ladies and gentlemen, have an inherent sense of fairness by which they judge any settlement. And that inherent sense of fairness tells them that a peace agreement with Israel must yield a viable, contiguous, independent, potentially prosperous, sovereign Palestinian state on 22% of their historic homeland, with East Jerusalem as its capital, and a solution to the refugee issue that honors the refugees and recognizes their legitimate rights and their suffering. That same inherent sense of fairness tells them that a rump state made up of disconnected Israeli throwaways is not what they have waited so long or sacrificed so much for. It tells them that the great compromise they made back in 1988, when they relinquished claim to 78% of their historic homeland, should be acknowledged and respected by the other party. Regrettably, the two-state solution is teetering under the weight of 170 settlements and almost 500,000 settlers. Time is running out on the two-state solution. With every brick that is laid in a settler's house, with every road that is paved for settlers, with every concrete slab that is erected for the wall that snakes in and out of the West Bank, the bond that ties Israelis and Palestinians together, which originates in the fact that we must share the same piece of land, grows just a little bit tighter. That is the great irony of Israel's settlement enterprise. Prime Minister Olmert recognized this. He said, and I quote, "The day will come when the two-state solution collapses and we face a South African-style struggle for equal voting rights." End of quote. Nevertheless, I remain hopeful that through negotiations we can reach a lasting peace between us on the basis of a two-state solution. For this process to be successful, however, we must again bring to it dignity and credibility. Oslo stalled because it quickly lost credibility. There was talk of peace, while actions on the ground worked against peace. Annapolis risks being the same unless Israel reconciles its behavior on the ground with its stated intentions of peace and creating a viable and independent Palestinian state. And so, if we are to get to where we want to be, we have to treat each other with dignity, lead with dignity. This means behaving like statesmen instead of politicians, thinking of the next generation, not the next elections. For Palestinians, what this means is remaining steadfast, not just to our principles for a solution, but to our commitment to nonviolence and previous agreements. And we are resolute in this, and make no mistake about it. As I mentioned earlier, I view my role as Prime Minister as one of assisting our people to the best of my ability to live just a little bit better than the day before and to stay on their land for another day and another. But we do it and will continue to do it through constructive, non-violent means that honor our very noble cause. For Israel, what this means is negotiating an agreement with us as equals, no more and no less. Not bullying Palestinians at the negotiating table with facts on the ground it only erected yesterday, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or 35 years ago. Saying no to the settlers. Not abusing its stature as an occupying power to coerce, for example, by withholding much-needed tax dollars when it disagrees with our legitimate means of diplomatic protest. Not shutting away 1.5 million Palestinians from the world for the unacceptable actions of a few. For the rest of the world, this means showing strength of leadership and getting tough with transgressors of our commonly held values, whether friend or foe. The world has been generous with us, backing our state-building efforts with robust financial investment, and has been tough with us when it felt we strayed onto an undesirable path. We now needed to be equally demanding of our neighbor. We need the international community to hold Israel to its word when it says it desires the establishment of a Palestinian state, a viable Palestinian state. We need the world to take practical steps to keep the establishment of such a state possible. Wagging its finger at continued settlement activity is simply not enough. With the help and encouragement of this U.S. administration, we are off to a good start. However, neither we nor the Israelis can afford to wait another 4 or 8 years. We will desperately need the immediate assistance and investment from the incoming administration if we are to make a success of the process begun at Annapolis. This is where the Palestinian American community, or more broadly, the Arab American community, can be of great service. To members of the Palestinian American community, let me first say that I'm privileged to have lived long enough in this country to appreciate its beauty and understand why you think this nation of immigrants became so great. You are an enormous but enormously underutilized source of strength to the cause of a just and durable peace. We need to work together to create that other state which one day you may wish to call home. We are facing many domestic difficulties and challenges, especially those related to the current state of separation. Do not give up on us. We have proposed concrete ideas, the adoption of which is capable of reuniting Gaza and the West Bank. These include the formation of a national consensus, non-factional government in the run-up to presidential and legislative elections, and the utilization of Arab security assistance for a transitional period to help with the rehabilitation of our security services and with the provision of law and order in Gaza until our services are rehabilitated. National dialogue on the key political issues can then proceed, but then against the backdrop of a reunified country, in the hope of sorting out our political differences, or at least forging a national consensus on how to manage these differences in a civilized, orderly, and non-violent manner. And just as you were not indifferent to the less than perfect way in which the Palestinian National Authority managed the affairs of the Palestinian people after Oslo, you cannot, I would submit, you cannot be indifferent to the risk of our country, our state in the making, sliding towards backwardness, isolation, repression of freedom, gender inequality, and culture and religious intolerance. For those who may have crossed that bridge to nowhere, to nothingness, for those who may have crossed that bridge to nowhere, to nothingness, indeed destructive nothingness, I respectfully ask that you reconsider. And so, my friends, we are at a crossroads. A lot is riding on the choices we all make. outcomes are not ordained or inevitable. We must seek to draw the right lessons from our experience with peacemaking since Madrid. Now is not the time to ditch the solution concept, which with President Bush's 2002 speech became a matter of explicit international consensus. Namely, the vision of two states living side by side in peace and security. For abandoning that concept would be another escape to destructive nothingness. Instead, we should make adjustments. Since Oslo, the pendulum has swung too far away from what international law and justice prescribes toward the diktat of practicality, towards what may be seen as acceptable to each of the parties to the conflict. This shift would not have been too problematic had it occurred in a context of parity of influence. However, with us Palestinians holding the shorter end of the stick, this disparity has necessarily meant an erosion in our position with each round of diplomacy that did not end with a solution. This structural defect has to be redressed. It is time for the pendulum to swing back in the direction of what international law and justice requires. Back in 1988, Palestinians made the historic and painful compromise that we felt was necessary to secure a solution to the conflict. As our Israeli neighbors think about what they consider to be painful compromises, it is my hope that they will devote equal time to reflecting on the promise that ending the occupation of all Arab territories holds, and that is normalization, not just with Arab countries, but with the 57 member states of the Islamic Conference who all endorse the Arab Peace Initiative. That consideration will no doubt be aided by effective international engagement, with the United States leading the way in close partnership with the rest of the community of nations, especially the other members of the quartet, as well as Arab countries. To me, ladies and gentlemen, this is the way forward. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.